Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters. I'm your host, Liz Lang. Each week on this podcast, we will break down various aspects of mental health. We are so excited you're here and hope you enjoy this week's episode. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Jeremiah and Selena Woodruff, and this week we're going to talk about strengthening sibling relationships, which is a good topic because a lot of people can relate to this. I would say most people can relate to this. There are some only kids out there, and siblings can be wonderful, great blessings, and they can also be the worst thing of your life, as many with siblings know. And I know that it's something all three of us have experience with. And one of the challenges that we're going to get into is age gaps with siblings. And this is something I personally had experience with growing up. My youngest brother is 10 years older than me. So there's an 8-year age gap between my two younger brothers. And it created an interesting dynamic growing up. And both of you have experience in this department with your own kids because you have, your kids range from early 20s to like kiddo. So tell me your thoughts on age gaps.
Yeah, so interesting first to kind of understand before we get into helping with that connection with those age gaps and with the differences as siblings is to kind of just understand something that goes on in families with differencing in age and what they call birth order. So this information comes from Positive Discipline book by Jane Nelson, but understanding birth order in your family and with your children and how that isn't meant to be used as a label, but it's meant to use to understand the reality that your children are living in. So they are always constantly looking to others in their perception of the world. So not necessarily that you're creating these things, but their perception of the world by what they are seeing. They start making decisions and beliefs about themselves and about others and their world. So they use that information that they are perceiving of their reality, and they make decisions based on what they think they need to do to survive and thrive. So they will either develop competence in a completely different area in their family. So say you have someone in your family that's really smart, and then they think that they need to be like the social butterfly or they need to be the athletic one to be able to survive in their family. The other thing they could do is to compete and try to be better than other siblings, or to be rebellious or revengeful, or to give up because of a belief that they can't compete. So again, these aren't used to be able to make labels about our children, but to understand their reality and their perception on life and what's happening. We have the difference of an older child, a middle child, youngest child. But what's really interesting is if you have a 4-year gap between kids, that birth order can start over. And gender actually plays a part into it too, because if you have an older girl, she takes on certain characteristics, whereas an older boy takes on different characteristics and responsibilities that they feel for that family. So understanding how birth order plays a part into that and what is typical of those roles that are played helps you to understand how your child could be perceiving the world in that sense. So obviously there's exceptions to the rules, but most children believe that they need to be different to be able to be significant and belong. And that goes right into with a family.
Which is really interesting and makes a lot of sense because I think, what it comes down to is kids have this natural desire to compete for resources, and their primary resource is love from their parents. And as parents, we know that we all love our children individually, uniquely, and there's enough love to go around. But kids don't always perceive that, or that's not always their perception, despite parents' best attempts. And so, that makes a lot of sense is this why kids can sometimes get competitive because their number one resource is mom or dad's time and attention. And so, that's where you can kind of get that competitiveness. Another thing that was really interesting to me is certain characteristics, especially if you have an older female. I was so excited when my mom got pregnant with my youngest brother because it was a little baby for me to actually kind of be a mom to. And I was thrilled. In fact, I remember when he came home from the hospital the first night when he got up in the middle of the night, I went into my mom's room and I got up and I'm like, but I want to help you with the baby. And she's like, that's sweet, but go back to bed. And now as a mom myself, I'm like, what was I thinking? Right? Like I understand the genuine burdens of that newborn phase. But, I definitely took on that role of mom, or I guess you might say third parent, right? And so, yeah, it's just family dynamics can be really interesting. So, let's get into sibling rivalry, or kind of just maybe even sibling conflict, and how to help kids learn to navigate conflict. Something that Curtis and I have been working on recently is not immediately jumping in when our kids fight. We've been trying to help them learn their own conflict resolution. And I understand this may not work for every family. Maybe there are some family dynamics where if once it starts, it just escalates. But for us and our family, and obviously if it got to a certain point, like, if someone starts throwing punches, we're probably going to intervene. But I'm curious to hear what your guys' thoughts are of let the kids just work it out themselves. If they're going to fight, if they're going to scream, if they're going to yell at each other, unless there's something genuinely dangerous going on, conflict resolution, let them figure it out or wait for them to come to you.
Yeah, that's great because things that we've already talked about, right, is allowing them to have that confidence to build making those choices. Whether those are the wrong choices too, you can always learn from that and understand and realize how maybe that wasn't a good choice to make. So obviously, like you said, keeping them safe and making sure that it's an okay environment to allow that opportunity for them to learn. What also plays into this too is development stage. So it's kind of tricky to have this podcast to talk about siblings because there's so many different dynamics. There's so many different ages. There's so many different scenarios that we could come up with to talk about. But if you have a teenager who is working through being independent and working through becoming more self-sufficient, and then you have a younger sibling who is at the stage in development of life of figuring out that they're actually separate from mom and dad and that they're their own person. You have that dynamic that plays into things too, right? So wherever the stage of development is with these siblings is going to play into that. Or as a family, what are you trying to teach them at that point? And like you shared, you're trying to teach your kids right now, like, that they can solve things. So what a great opportunity to use to learn in that area of that they can build their confidence and be able to make those choices.
Yeah, I like that you shared those things, Liz. I think what you're doing with your kids is great, and it works great at the stage they're at. One bit of caution with that might be that if we have like a 14, 15-year-old sibling and a 5 or 6-year-old sibling, we want to be pretty careful with that because we could turn into more of a bullying situation and have some troubles there. But in general, yeah, if your kids are close enough in age and at a stage where they can safely resolve their conflicts, there might be a little bit of yelling or whatever, but there could be a lot of value in that. And as Selena was talking about the stage of development, we can have sibling challenges clear through adulthood and until the end of life, right? We have these siblings and these relationships that are really important to us throughout our lifetime. Siblings can be such a great source of knowledge and information, a source of comfort and strength as you go through difficult times. So we want to cultivate healthy relationships with our children. And a lot of that starts with our relationships with our own siblings.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I am very still to this day, I'm pretty close with my youngest brother. And I did take on a lot of that mothering role to him. And, he did look up to me a lot. And in fact, I was the primary babysitter. And we'll kind of circle back to that one a little bit in this episode, is this idea of babysitting, right? Or older kids babysitting. So, And to this day, he calls me and he asks me for advice, and he even will call Curtis and ask for advice too. So he's, obviously incorporated Curtis into his family network of siblings, right? Older siblings that he can look up to and lean on for support. And that's a really wonderful thing. I have some other siblings who sometimes we have challenges. Sometimes we have conflict even as an adult that we've had to work through and resolve. And so, I think you're right. Siblings are it's an ever evolving phase of life, like anything, right?
I think it's fascinating, the bond with siblings. You've seen these memes that go around, say something like along the lines of siblings are only those people that you're like, hey, remember when I like attacked you? And then you just laugh about it.
Mm-hmm.
So many stories we can think of those things we did to each other as siblings, and we just have that bond throughout life, and that we can laugh with them. Other people, I'm not sure we would be that same way with, but funny to think back and the things that happen when with your siblings, but yet you're so close.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about how we can foster closeness when you do have an age gap. So it was pretty easy for me and my youngest brother. I mean, I babysat him. My other two brothers, mom and dad, they definitely leaned on more me towards babysitting, which was fine. But, maybe for other siblings, how can you foster a relationship or cultivate a positive relationship when you have, maybe like a 10-year age gap, or even a 12 or 15-year age gap, which can happen?
Yeah, this is an interesting topic that we've talked about quite a bit. When we look at siblings, especially when we have somebody who's maybe 17, 18 years old and their younger sibling is 12 or 13, they kind of take on this role often, especially like in our family. Our oldest, she comes over and she still acts like mom, and kind of mothers all the other kids, and it's great, and it's a wonderful thing, and she's a wonderful person. But what ends up happening is you have this differential in age, and so the older one feels like they should tell the younger one what to do. But what happens is as they get older is they start to catch up in age, or so it appears, right? They're still the same difference, but a 21-year-old and a 31-year-old 10 years apart is really not that big of an age gap anymore, right? We shrunk that age gap a little bit. And so it can be really tough, but we certainly want to provide opportunity to cultivate that relationship and develop it in a way that's mutually respectful. Our oldest went away to college when our youngest was just a baby, and our youngest has never really lived with her oldest sibling. Yet they have a good relationship, and a lot of that just has to do with our family dynamics and involvement in one another's lives, and creating those opportunities. And I think that a big part of it is communication with mom and dad, and just doing what you can to, like I said, cultivate those relationships in a way that they grow and develop into something that's positive.
Well, I think they have to want that relationship. You can't force any kind of relationship or connection with somebody, right? And so with us, our oldest being gone, she wanted that relationship with her siblings, and she's done a fantastic job of reaching out and always being involved and making sure that they're involved in each other's life, even when we have lived far away from each other. I think that it needs to be that they want to have that relationship. And if they do, finding that common ground, even just with all of us, that connection and what we want comes from the effort and the effort to get to know them and what they like to do and what they want to do. So even siblings that are that far apart in age can connect with video games, right? I have older youngers that they like to play Minecraft. Not that they always want to play Minecraft together or or very kind about it, but there's times that like the younger one can learn from the older one and say, "Hey, what about this?" or "Oh, how did you build that in Minecraft?" And then it gives that opportunity for the older one to connect with the younger one.
Yeah, which is, I mean, can be a really great way to help kind of foster those types of relationships, is just through mutual interests. I think sometimes that can also be a source of conflict too. So,
absolutely.
I mean, I think, a 15 or 16-year-old might not always want their 8-year-old kid brother tagging along into what they're doing. But that can also be an issue for siblings close in age. I'm pretty sure the bane of my older brother's existence was that for his junior and senior year of high school, I did all of the same sports that he did, and I'm fairly certain he hated it.
Yep, most likely.
Yeah.
But he
But
might look back on it fondly today.
I don't know. I would have to ask him about it, but I know that it drove him crazy because he felt like he had his annoying little sister around him all the time. And again, it's one of those things that I think siblings just have to deal.
With that, it's just like what we talked about at the beginning, right? He found his sense of belonging by being a certain whatever in those sports. So
Yeah.
to have you come, that was threatening to him,
Mm,
who he was, how he found his sense of belonging. He that was competing against him in that sense.
yeah, which does make total sense, and I can totally see him, I
How
see him feeling that way. Yeah.
how it was explained in the book that helped me to see was that like a family is a play. So in a play you have different roles and different characters. So if he was already the athletic one,
Hmm.
you come and try to be the athletic one, he's like, "Wait, but who am I? What's my role in this play?"
Yeah. Yeah, which is really interesting because he had a little bit of a difficult time individuating. I guess he definitely had some of the more classic teenage rebellion kind of stuff that he went through, and just kind of high conflict between him and my parents, which is often totally normal, right? And so I think that might have played into it, or that might have been part of it was all tied together, right? He had this obnoxious little sister who was just into everything that he did, and he is trying to individuate, and he's just got this family member that won't let go. So let's talk a little bit about older family members or older siblings, maybe who feel frustrated or annoyed at the burdens that they might share. So I remember reading this meme on Facebook that said, "Don't burden your older children with babysitting. They didn't make the decision to have those children, so don't make them have to deal with the adult consequences." And my immediate thought was, no, I disagree. Now, you can take it to an extreme, but no, you live there and you're going to contribute to the family household. And, there was times where and I'll admit, there's times where it's like, I don't want to babysit. I want to go do my own thing. But looking back, I am nothing but grateful for my parents having me babysit, because when I became a mom myself, I had a lot of confidence going into being a first time mom. I knew how to make a bottle. I knew how to change a diaper. I kind of knew the basics of caring for a child. So, I felt prepared, and I'm really grateful that my parents gave me that opportunity. So, you guys have probably run into this quite often in your household. Tell me your thoughts on it.
Well, we've had lots of different situations and scenarios in this department, but
Uh-huh.
funny to laugh. We joke in our family. Our oldest says she doesn't need to have kids. She's already raised a family. So,
Right? Yeah.
but with me, children need to feel a sense of belonging, and in a family need to feel a sense of belonging. And so that would be a contribution to the family by having them have those opportunities to care for other siblings. Of course, you need to be careful because the ability of each individual child is going to differ in the sense of what they can handle and what responsibilities they can have with caring for other siblings. And like you said, cautioning against
Hmm.
having them take so much care and responsibility on themselves.
I think caution is the key word with
Hmm.
all of that. I can talk about, I served a mission for our church as a young man, and met somebody who was an oldest sibling, and he really struggled with that. He felt that his mom and dad really dumped a lot on him,
Mm.
and he had to grow up young and care for his family, and it created resentment. And that's where we probably need to be cautious and careful, is that we're not dumping too much on older children with the younger children. And I actually would tend to agree with the fact that I didn't make the decision to bring these children in the world. Why do I have to care for them? Now, that's not saying that they shouldn't babysit because I definitely think older children should help care for their younger children, but
Hmm.
just finding a balance in a way that's healthy and appropriate. One of the things that we did for a long time was, okay, we need somebody to babysit. Mom and dad are going to go out on Friday. You guys can have Saturday or vice versa, or whatever it is, and just so that they have opportunity to be out with their friends and do the things that they want to do, but we can also, you know, have them learn those types of responsibilities and helping to teach them that they have these roles that they play and contributions that they need to give to the family. And sometimes that might be babysitting. Sometimes it's cleaning up after your younger siblings when you didn't make a mess at all. Somebody cleaned up after you too, and that was probably mom and dad. Right. And so the process just evolves as you go through it.
Yeah, I agree. And I will say that that's one thing that my parents did a good job of is balance. I was a very, very involved kid and all sorts of extracurricular activities, and babysitting never took priority over any of my extracurricular activities, right? And so they did find a good balance. And in fact, over the summers once I was in high school, my mom went back to work, and so I babysat over the summers, and every day, all day, or for quite a while, I babysit my younger brother. But I was paid for it in that instance. I mean, when I say paid for it, I mean my parents paid for my car insurance in exchange for me babysitting, right? And so, there's also opportunities there, right? Because it was at that point more like a full-time job because I am responsible for him, basically all summer long while he's not in school. So there's lots of wonderful opportunities to, incorporate ways to help family belonging while also still letting your kids be autonomous, because I think that would be really unfortunate. We want to let them be a kid, let them explore, let them grow, and, for as long as they can, just let them hold on to that, that childlike wonder that we all love to see in a healthy growing kid.
Yeah, and I was going to add to my statement there that we want to make sure that we're not just dumping things onto our kids and making them miss things that they had been planning for or
Hmm.
preparing for. Maybe they had a big activity with friends that they wanted to do. Oh, sorry, you got to babysit tonight. We don't want to do that to our kids. We want to find a way for them to engage in appropriate, healthy, age appropriate activities such as
Hmm.
dating and things of that nature. And they can take an evening here or there and babysit as well if that's what works for your family.
Right.
What helps, I think, with teaching this is it doesn't really always have to be. Granted, I realize when you have younger little kids,
Hmm.
there has to be somebody in charge and somebody that is babysitting.
Hmm.
But as our kids have gotten older, I'm more like, no one's babysitting. You're just taking care of each other. There doesn't need to be a boss or somebody in charge. I just need to make sure that everyone is safe here. Of course, you're going to give somebody in charge, like, hey, you're making sure this is happening.
Yeah.
As they get older, they can take care of each other, take care of themselves. They really can take care of themselves.
I actually like that. I think that's a really good approach because I tell you what, I remember my older brother being a tyrant sometimes because he was quote unquote in charge. And I'm like, I don't need a babysitter. I'm 12. Like, you're not in charge of me anymore. Just
Exactly.
right. And okay, and because I agree, there needs to be somebody in the house that is responsible enough not to burn the house down, right? That's kind of like our main goal, is that, nobody catches the house on fire. So yeah, there should probably be a designated person, or in the event that there is a fire, a designated person to get everybody out of the house, right? So some sort of safety procedure, right? But I think you're right. So, if you're like, let's say your youngest is, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old, they're pretty much old enough to look after themselves. And then you have a kid that's 15. It's like, hey, if there's an emergency, this is who you can go to. Or if you need something, or if somebody comes to the door, right? So you have these kind of safety procedures in place. But I like the idea of you're just basically looking after yourselves because they are old enough that they are responsible. Family dynamics or different dynamics can also come into play. Our oldest recently turned 12. We still haven't really asked her to babysit. One, because we don't trust her and her sister not to try to kill each other while we're gone. That's one aspect. And another aspect is our youngest has some special needs. And that's a lot to put on a 12-year-old child, right? Is putting his care on her. That's kind of more than we're comfortable with. So it's really finding out what works for your family, because every family dynamic is different.
Well, and every kid is different because you might have a younger sibling actually be in charge and be looking out and babysitting than an older one that maybe isn't comfortable with being in charge with that responsibility.
Yeah, which is totally fine. Okay, let's talk about avoiding fueling sibling rivalry, because I think sometimes parents can do this unintentionally. And I'm a firm believer that most parents are genuinely just trying to do the best they can. But I think there's always more tools and more resources and more things to learn. So tell me your thoughts on this, on avoiding fueling the sibling rivalry, or some common mistakes that parents might make that inadvertently can fuel that sibling rivalry. Okay, let's take a quick break and we will be right back.
Eye-Opening Moments podcasts are real-life stories of adversity, encounters, and perspectives. They are moments that can lift your spirits, give you some food for thought, or move you. For the introspective mind that likes to reflect, discover, and find solutions or meaning in a complex life, listen to Eye-Opening Moments podcasts.
So when we were talking already about how they are perceiving the reality of their world, so sometimes that's tricky because we're not intentionally meaning to create that competition, but by maybe celebrating and giving attention to one child who's doing so well in an area, that makes another one feel threatened. So maybe being more aware and making sure that there is equal positive attention given to the siblings. But what was really interesting to me is that when there is competition in the home, parents are creating that competition sometimes when they don't agree on parenting techniques, which was really interesting to me to understand. When you are maybe not agreeing or supporting each other on your parenting techniques, that could create a competition with your children, in the sense that, like, say, hey, we don't use cell phones at the dinner table, and then the other parent is like, oh, it's not a big deal, it's fine. The children are going to see how you are not united in that effort, and then they'll start driving that competition within the home.
Which makes a lot of sense to me. That's and that is super interesting. And so I think you can set a clear boundary, or I guess a clear expectation of, hey, mom and I are on the same team always. If you know what mom says, I will say, I will always back her up. And that way they never have to go to, well, if one said no, I can just go to the other and maybe they'll say yes. Shut that down. I think that's really easy to shut down. And not that you don't have, differing parenting styles. You don't have to have discussions about parenting styles, but it probably should be something that should be done when the kids aren't around.
Yeah, most certainly. And your kids will, even if you are on the same page, try and go to the other parent to get what they want. And sometimes, you may not be aware that mom already said no to that and you say yes. It's an opportunity to help children understand when those things do happen, that, oh, mom and dad are on the same page. So, if I said something different than mom, that's because I didn't know what mom said.
Yeah.
And I will support mom in whatever she decides, or mom will support dad in whatever he decides. And then certainly those differences in parenting and opinions need to be resolved through communication behind closed doors. And you're not always going to be on the same page, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
No.
But you have to be united in your parenting, and you have to come to some sort of an agreement that, hey, this is where we stand on this or that, or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so let's give a really good real world example of what could maybe inadvertently create, or probably has in my household, inadvertently created some sibling rivalry, or at least probably created some maybe unsafe feeling for my kids. So, my youngest, as I have shared before, he's spent a lot of time in the hospital in the last year. So he has a medical condition, and so he's just, I mean, we went through these series of a lot of hospital visits, and every time I was blessed and fortunate enough to be able to go and be with him the entire time. My girls were able to stay home with both dad and grandpa. So we're also very fortunate in our family to have a great dynamic where that works well. But I can't help imagining it from their perspective of, wow, mom's gone and giving all of this time and attention to our younger brother. So tell me your thoughts on that, and some things that maybe Curtis and I could do to help mitigate this idea of mom loves brother more than me because she's dedicating all of this time to him.
Yeah, and that can be a tough one, right? I remember
Mhm.
when Selena was pregnant with our third child, and we found out it was going to be a boy. My girls, and I don't remember which one specifically, but said something about, well, now dad's going to have a little boy and he's going to give him all of his attention. And so it's an opportunity for conversation, right? And to
Mhm.
develop those communication skills with your children to help them see and understand what's happening. And I guess my perspective on that is you've got to work to cultivate each individual relationship with each child. And then you don't have that, even though you may not be spending as much time, but making sure you take opportunity to be with each child individually regularly, whether that's, once a week or every other week or every couple of days, however you choose to do that in your family. But develop that relationship. Take your daughter out on a date and, hey, she loves to, get her hair done. So I'm going to go take her to get her hair cut, and we're going to go get lunch and just strengthen our relationship. And that certainly will help mitigate that, at least at some level.
Yeah, that definitely is a situation where you could see how your child is going to perceive that. And that's important to understand that no matter what we do, we're not going to be able to control how our kids are perceiving
Mhm.
the world and what's going on. But having those conversations and being curious and asking them questions to understand their experience and what they're experiencing so that you can help them to understand that each one of them is unique and they all individually have their own greatness and things that are good about them that you appreciate and love, and that you can focus and give that attention to them specifically in the way that they need and what is needed for them at that time.
And Selena, I love that reminder that our kids are unique. And even in our house, our rules are not the same for every child. So
Mhm.
everybody's not equal. And they all have a different need, as Selena talked about, to have something. And maybe this youngest needs more of mom's attention, and that doesn't translate into mom loves them more. It just translates into where the need in the family is, and that you would do the same for any of your children.
As a parent, if you can have the thought, what is happening right now is exactly what needs to happen.
Yeah.
Help you get past some of maybe that guilt you might be feeling of like, oh, I'm spending all this time with him and how are they feeling? What are they experiencing? And they're going to think this. So I can't control any of that. I can't control what they are thinking or experiencing. But if you can even have the thoughts of what is happening right now is exactly what needs to happen. So if your daughter is experiencing like, oh, mom loves him more, what could that benefit and help her later in life? What is she learning from that of like, oh, I remember when my mom spent all that time with my brother and helped him. And could that shape and mold her and give her experience to help her to be the person she's going to be?
That's a really great perspective. And, thankfully, I feel like I have a fairly good, well-rounded. I mean, and don't get me wrong, it's hard to be away from my other two kiddos. But at the end of the day, I know and understand, like my youngest needs me. He doesn't understand why he has to be here, right, in this hospital. And so again, I'm grateful that I'm able to be with him 24/7 when he's in a hospital. Okay, so this felt like a really good topic to me, and I hope you all learned something. Next week, we are going to get into emerging adulthood. So it's kind of that awkward transition of I'm 18 and I'm technically an adult, but I'm not quite an adult yet. We're going to break that down and maybe talk about how it's differing and how it's changing and how it's kind of evolving. So we will see you all next week. Have a question? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com.